Who wants to talk demolition derby? I want to talk demolition derby. Do you want to talk demolition derby? Tips and tricks for 80s Vicks, Lincolns, and here we go. So quick how we 90 our trunks. So we cut the inner bracing for the trunk. We cut the inner lip of the trunk right here. So that we good about 6 inches on each side. We cut the inner bracing about 2 to 3 inches wide all the way across, and then you slowly bend it in and tuck it into the spots. Now before you do any of that, you're going to want to dimple your frame. That's probably about 6 to 7 inches. What we do is we cut a hole out in the bottom first, above the frame rail. We heat it, and I beat it with a hammer. A good 6-inch hole, beat the top end, and then it'll give you a nice 90 bump buckle on each side. We only do once, but I know some guys cut them and do 2. But this is what it will look like when it's done. Alright. And then you want to make sure that where you 90 your trunk lines up with that dimple underneath. So you're just going to cut the floor pan out right above the frame. Heat it. Dimple it with a hammer. Get a nice bend. You don't want too much, just enough. Also, what we do is we use the stock back bumper. We weld plates on it because it's not steel, it's aluminum. But we take the shock mounts, we leave them stock, we don't move them. We end up heating them and bending them slightly with a come along. So that's kind of on an angle so that it all rolls up and in. Now, also depending on the rules, when you're doing all this, would be a good time to do your hump plates. Hard to see in there, but these are heated and dimpled with a hammer all along the hump plates. You can also cut holes up through the speaker deck, run chain down and around, but make sure you go high on the you want to go high on the rail, because if you go low, this is why. Go low on the rail with a chain, it's going to pull your humps in, but it's going to blow it out. And that's exactly what you do. So you want to make sure you go high if you're chaining the humps. If not, if you're allowed plate, you can plate them. Or what we do is heat it and dimple it on the inside and outside. Just get it in there the best you can. Some other tips and tricks that we do for 80s Lincolns, 80s Vicks, if I can get to it. You're going to take those 2 bolts right there on the A-arm, slide them out. It's going to give you a better pitch and help you when you weld down your A-arms. These A-arms aren't welded down because we weren't allowed, but recommend doing that even if you're not welding them solid. Other recommendation is make sure you weld your steering box to the inside of the frame and get yourself, there's a U-joint on Amazon. I don't know if you can see in there and see it, but we added the U-joint to the bottom of the shaft, and we made it basically a homemade slider so that it will, when it starts to nose, it will slide. Trying to think what else. We don't change any of the factory body bolts except for the front core support. This one's not the best, but we'll show it to you. So what we do is we put a spacer in between here, 2.5 inches spacer, get the body up. We run all threads straight down through that hole, down to the bottom. Big washer on the bottom, another nut at the base, and then another nut at the top, connecting it all together. For The front bumper, recommend getting rid of the stock one, going something steel, 70s GM, early 80s GM. Back or front are usually steel. What we do is take the bolts out right here, slide the whole shock out on both sides. Save the bolts though. Then we plate and weld that to the bumper. While the shocks are out, you want to drill them or burn them or something. Just be careful because they are filled. They'll tend to explode if you hit them right. So you want to try to get the stuff out of them as best you can. And then you're going to put the whole bumper in and then hammer it with a sledgehammer straight to the frame as close as you can get it, and you keep going until it stops moving. Put the bolts back in and weld the bolts in. Also, we change some of the core support bolts. We go to a thicker bolt up here on both sides, just so it holds a little bit better. For mounting purposes, if you got an aluminum hood, you can't weld to the actual aluminum hood. We take angle, put it on the inside fender well, weld it in nice, drill 2 holes through the hood to bolt your hood down. And then the rest of the information is just common sense. You can change your springs if you want, depending on how much into your class you're getting or how much they allow. We also do the same on the back. We tend to run a higher trunk at our fair just because of the way it's set up and the space. We like a higher trunk there, but you can bring it down. All you're going to do is you get coil spring clamps and coil spring them down, or it depends on how you want to do it. You can take flat stock, wrap it around the coil spring, compress it, and then weld the springs in. Different tricks, different things. But like I said, we tend to use a higher rung trunk. And that's basically how we do our VIX for just a stockish limited weld build, light weld build. If you have any questions, just ask. So I'm just going to do a once over of my car so you can see what's going on with it. For the most part, recommend pulling the motor. Don't use a stock 5.0 unless you're really good with wiring. The front loom has every negative you can imagine in it, and that whole loom has to stay intact for it to run decently. So either change it to an HEI and a carb, or put a Chevy or a Mopar in it, whatever you want, whatever you got your hands on if you can. But here's a once around. Yeah, you definitely want to bolt your fender wells. Hard to see right now. But I got fender well bolts. I do it on both side, driver's and passenger side, and same back with the back tire as well. But these are cut out wider. I do recommend cutting these out a little bit square and a little bit wider than bolting them. Otherwise, you're going to have the same issue I did. It got mangled completely. So then I had to cut out more than I wanted to, just so I had a clean tire. Yeah, that video took longer than I wanted it to. But yeah, that's basically how we do our 80s VIX. Listen, I know you're going to be in the comments saying different things. It's fine. It is. Everyone builds different. Everybody builds for a different rule set. Everyone do. So listen, just throw your tips and tricks in the bottom. This is to help somebody who asks me how to build a Lincoln. So this is how we do it to a limited weld, we call it, but I know it's a little lighter than what most people do. So it's basically just to help a beginner. So help us all out. Drop your thoughts in the comments.